On a crisp September night, deep in the Rockies, the road stretched out before me like a dark ribbon. I've driven Highway 12 between Idaho Springs and Georgetown countless times during my nearly 15 years as a truck driver, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. The route was familiar, winding paths cutting through tall pines and rocky cliff overpasses. 6 hours into my drive, most rest stops were closed and classic rock played softly on the radio. That's when I first noticed the light. Pure white and unnaturally bright, it hovered about 100 feet off the ground to my right. Initially, I thought it might be a maintenance truck's floodlight or another vehicle. But something wasn't right. No sound, no movement. Just this steady, unwavering light tracking alongside my truck. When I drove under an overpass, the light vanished instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. I checked my mirrors, scanned the cab, but saw nothing. Seconds later, it reappeared exactly where it had been before. The road wound through a narrow section hemmed in by cliffs and thick forest. No houses or businesses were nearby that could explain the light. As mountain shadows deepened and fog started rolling in, the phenomenon became even more bizarre and prominent. This wasn't like any vehicle's headlights. It didn't shift or change speed. Instead, it matched my movements precisely. When I slowed down, it slowed. When I sped up, it accelerated too. The whole situation felt surreal, like an invisible force was tracking me, maintaining a constant distance. I tried rationalizing it, maybe a survey drone or new highway lighting system, but I'd seen drones before, and they always had blinking red lights. This was different. Silent, steady, unnervingly solid. At a turnout, I stopped to stretch and catch my breath. The light remained on the road, waiting just past the last overpass. Something was out there, watching, following, defying everything I knew about normal roadside phenomena. I was working the overnight shift as a security guard at a pretty isolated industrial site just outside Spokane, Washington. The place was one of those big chemical plants, fenced off, surrounded by dense forest, and way too quiet at night. My job was mostly sitting in the K-roll room, watching monitors, checking doors, and doing rounds every couple hours. Most nights it was boring as hell. This happened about 3 months ago, right as fall was settling in. The nights were cold, the air heavy with the smell of wet leaves and earth, and there was this fog that sometimes rolled in thick enough to blur the floodlights around the perimeter. I got to work around 10 p.m. and clocked in. As I was driving through the mountains, the area was completely deserted. No trucks, no workers, just forest and rocks. I attempted to call dispatch to check for any roadwork, but the mountain's dead zone killed my signal. A sense of isolation crept over me. The road behind was dark and empty, with that light sitting there watching and waiting. Back in the truck, as soon as I passed the next overpass, the light reappeared. Now it was closer, maybe 50 feet up, hovering perfectly in line with my passenger window. It wasn't a typical light source. No structure, no shape, just a pure white orb, smooth as a spotlight suspended in midair. The silence was the most unnerving part. No mechanical hum, no drone, no buzzing, just absolute quiet. Even with my truck's loud engine running, I kept glancing over, searching for any hint of explanation. A shadow, a frame, a wire, anything. But there was nothing. Just that perfect circular light. Driving slower now, my eyes darted between the road and the mysterious light. An unsettling feeling of being watched, of being followed by something invisible, grew stronger. It was a sensation beyond simple fear, something deeper, more primal. When I finally hit the outskirts of town, the light vanished once I crossed beneath the last overpass before the highway flattened out into normal streets and buildings. I stopped at a gas station, tried to tell the clerk what happened, but he just laughed it off and said I probably saw a drone or a reflection. I didn't push it. Everyone who drives these mountain roads probably has a story or two they don't mention. The rest of my trip was uneventful. I kept looking back. Around 3 a.m., the night shift was wearing me down. My black coffee had gone cold beside me, and the soft hum of machinery was occasionally interrupted by metallic creaks in the cool air. Half listening to maintenance crew radio chatter, I scrolled through camera feeds, my eyelids growing heavy. At exactly 3:12 a.m., something strange happened. Every motion-triggered camera on the main screen lit up simultaneously, which was bizarre considering no movement had been detected for hours before this moment. I expected to see a stray animal or an out-of-place worker, but the footage showed only pure white static. No blurry shapes, no shadows, just noise. I refreshed the feed repeatedly and checked system logs, Everything confirmed the sensors had triggered and cameras attempted to record, yet no images appeared. Switching between different camera angles yielded the same result. Pure static, all time-stamped at 3:12 a.m. with no signs of movement. Calling my supervisor, I reported the incident. He dismissed it as a technical error, telling me to monitor the situation. Unconvinced, I decided to conduct a physical inspection. Grabbing my flashlight, I ventured out into the foggy night. The cold air was thick, my flashlight's beam struggling to cut through. This reminded me of another strange experience I'd had while driving. In my mirrors, I'd seen something, a light that didn't behave like any machine I'd known. It followed me under the overpasses, then disappeared when the road hit it. I checked online, called the highway patrol, but found no explanation. No reports of strange lights or drone tests in the area. Since then, I'd been back on that route several times, but the light never showed up again. Yet I still think about it. That silent, steady white light hanging just off the road, keeping pace with me like it was waiting or watching. Every time I drive through those overpasses in my head, I remember it blinking out just before I passed beneath, then popping back on right after. Nothing about it made sense. Nothing explained why it followed me, or why it vanished under the overpasses. It was real, though, and I can't quite figure out why. Walking the perimeter through the dense mist, I listened carefully. Nothing seemed out of place. The security gates were locked, fences intact. No footprints or broken branches disrupted the silence. But the camera's static bothered me. Back in the control room, I noticed something odd. The digital clock jumped erratically between 3:11 and 313. The monitors had a subtle shimmer, as if struggling to maintain their image. I rebooted the system, and after a few minutes, everything returned to normal. No more static, no more flickering. Yet something felt different. The quiet seemed heavier, like the fog had followed me inside. During my night shifts, I remained vigilant, checking monitors carefully. Weeks passed without incident. Maintenance logs showed nothing unusual, and my coworkers reported no strange events. But something always nagged at me. Whenever thick fog rolled in, fleeting moments unsettled me. Monitors would twitch, static would briefly flicker, and shadows would move at the screen's edge. Looking directly revealed nothing. I considered quitting. The isolation was wearing me down, and that first static event had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. However, the job paid decently, and I had no other options. 2 weeks later, everything changed. Midway through my shift, the camera system went completely dark for 10 seconds before flickering back to life. When the feeds returned, motion-triggered cameras were blank, pure, black screens. That familiar, hollow feeling returned. I rushed outside with my flashlight, heart racing. The fog was heavier than ever, obscuring everything beyond the fence line. I spent nearly an hour scanning the silent woods, finding nothing. Back inside, I discovered something bizarre. An old chipped mug with a faded logo sitting on my desk. I knew I hadn't brought it, and when I asked Dan, the day guard, he insisted he hadn't touched anything. Strange occurrences became routine. The clock would blink unexpectedly. Screens would freeze momentarily. Static emerged and disappeared without explanation. My amateur radio setup has always been my escape from the world's noise, a simple transceiver and homemade antenna perched on my Vermont house's roof. Late April brought a cool night with the earth's scent hanging in the damp air. Around 10 p.m., I typically scanned HF bands, occasionally calling out while my dog rests nearby. Just after 11 p.m., something changed. A faint clicking emerged, so subtle it could be missed. But these weren't random noises. The clicks arrived in a precise rhythm. 3 sharp sounds spaced evenly, followed by an 11-second pause before repeating. I checked my equipment, certain it might be interference, but everything tested clean. The signal came through clearly. Unlike anything I'd encountered before, the radio crackled with an eerie, repetitive pattern that held me captive for nearly 45 minutes. Using my Nook, I meticulously tracked the intervals. At 3:12 a.m., the camera showed only static when movement should have been visible. I radioed the channel, but silence answered. Something was watching me. I could sense it through the cameras, even when screens displayed nothing. Muffled voices drifted through the radio, soft whispers just beyond comprehension, like conversations happening just out of reach. I called out but received no response. Dan from the previous shift reported nothing unusual. Yet late at night, with fog settling thick around the pond, an unsettling sensation grew. Cameras would appear and vanish without warning. The fog seemed to advance, creeping closer, as if alive. Weeks later, the incident still haunted me. I repeatedly reviewed footage, logs and systems, searching for an explanation. Something felt hidden, just out of reach, concealed in the camera gaps within the fog. Was it a system malfunction or something else entirely? I still don't know. The clicks were unnervingly precise, exactly 3 taps, separated by 11 seconds of silence. Their mechanical rhythm felt deliberate, almost intentional, never wavering or changing pace. I tried calling out on the frequency, but silence answered back. Switching radio bands and searching for surrounding signals proved useless. These clicks existed in complete isolation, quietly broadcasting into the dark night. Midnight found me outside, checking the antenna. The sky was a crystal clear canvas, sharp stars punctuating the darkness. No aircraft or satellite blinked overhead. The neighborhood lay still, distant traffic sounds and tree rustlings the only background noise. Peering upward, I questioned whether I was imagining meaning into simple mechanical sounds. Yet the clicks persisted through the radio, steady and unchanging. Back inside, the spectrum analyzer revealed no obvious signal spike or modulation, just 3 distinct sharp taps repeating every 11 seconds. A strange anticipation gripped me. Something felt like it was waiting, but nothing happened. The clicks continued their relentless pattern until 11:40, when they suddenly stopped, as if someone had flipped a switch. Silence replaced the rhythmic sound, static returning to the channel. I sat motionless, fingers on the dial, expecting the pattern to restart. It didn't. Speculation raced through my mind. Was this a test signal, an experimental transmitter, an unknown digital communication method? Online research and radio forums yielded nothing. No announcements, no similar reports emerged. Sharing the experience with fellow ham radio operators produced mixed reactions. Some dismissed it casually. Others suggested interference or equipment malfunction. Yet no one could explain the perfect timing or the precise 3-click repetition. Days later, I attempted to recreate the experience, tuning into the same frequency at the same time. Nothing, just static and background noise. I continued listening on subsequent nights, hoping for a recurrence, but the mysterious signal never returned. Sometimes I could swear I hear the faintest echo of those clicks. The night sky was perfect that night in my tiny Central Oregon town. I'm Jamie, 17, and with the windows locked tight by my parents, I had a sneaking out strategy. Around 11:30 p.m., I carefully slipped through my bedroom window, hoping my parents were asleep and my dog wouldn't bark. I grabbed my little telescope and headed to the open farmland behind our house. The night was moonless, with stars blazing in sharp clarity against the dark canvas of sky. I had set up my telescope near the field's edge, where grass melts into a dirt road, scanning for familiar celestial patterns. The early summer air held a whisper of spring's lingering chill. At first, everything seemed routine. Stars twinkled, a distant town glimmered softly. But something shifted after about 20 minutes. The crickets fell silent, an unnatural quiet descending. The breeze died completely, and the air felt weighted, as if holding its breath. Then, I saw it. What initially looked like a cloud revealed itself as something entirely different. A massive black triangle hung in the sky, impossibly smooth and precise. It wasn't a typical shape, but more like a perfect geometric slice cut from the night's fabric. No discernible edges, no texture, just an empty void moving with uncanny stillness. The object blocked out stars, its razor-sharp borders unnaturally straight. Unlike soft cloud boundaries, this shape was geometric and solid. My telescope proved useless. The triangle was so dark it nearly swallowed starlight. Its movement was slow and steady, ruling out any conventional aircraft. No blinking lights, no typical markers, just a dark mass gliding from northwest to southeast. My heart raced. Part of me wanted to run inside, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. My dead phone sat forgotten in my pocket. In just 5 minutes, the triangle covered half the sky. Then, without warning, it vanished. One moment present, blocking stars, the next, nothing. No sound, no flash, just absolute disappearance. Later, lying in bed, I couldn't shake the memory of strange clicks. A rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat just beyond hearing. Machine radio phenomenon, or something unexplainable. I couldn't be sure. The sound had filled the room with its precise, consistent beat before vanishing as mysteriously as it arrived. Now I keep my radio on at night, hoping it might return. Maybe someday I'll understand what I witnessed, but for now, it remains an enigmatic memory etched into the dark summer sky. I first noticed something strange 2 years back on the dry lake bed. just a mile from my home. Not every night, but with an almost mechanical precision, it always happened at 2:33 a.m. sharp. One sleepless night around 2:30, I grabbed my old binoculars from the nightstand and peered out the window. That's when I spotted a tiny, faint light on the lake bed. Not like a flashlight, but a pale, hazy glow, about as bright as a distant street lamp, yet completely motionless. I wondered if someone was camping or had a broken-down vehicle. But there were no sounds, no engines, no voices, no movement at all. When I looked again a minute later, the light had vanished. The next night I set an alarm to investigate. Right on schedule at 2:33, the light reappeared in the exact same spot. Through my binoculars, I could see a pinprick of pale light hovering just above the cracked ground. It didn't flicker or move, just hung there like a distant star dropped onto the earth. I watched for about 10 minutes. Nothing changed, no brightness shift, no shape alteration. Then it simply disappeared as if someone had flipped the switch. After several nights, I started keeping a log. Each night I'd set my alarm, grab the binoculars and watch. Sometimes it appeared, sometimes it didn't. But when it did, it was always at 2:33, not a minute earlier or later. Nevada's quiet landscape became my sanctuary after years of contracting work. My name's Roy, and I craved solitude far from city noise. My friends would never understand, always caught up in parties, sports, and online trends. The world around me slowly returned to normal after that night. Crickets started chirping. The breeze picked up and stars began twinkling again as if nothing had happened. Packing up my telescope, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the triangle to reappear, but it didn't. Inside, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with what I'd seen. It was too solid, too large to be a hallucination. Something had been up there, watching, waiting, deliberately avoiding detection. I never told anyone. Every night after that, I found myself scanning the sky, hoping for answers. Nothing ever came, just that one silent, mysterious shape that seemed to exist between reality and imagination. The dry lake bed was my obsession, a flat, cracked mud expanse with no signs of human activity. No tire tracks, no footprints, just emptiness stretching in every direction. Something had been happening here for decades, with locals reporting mysterious lights that vanished as quickly as they appeared. One late spring night, I decided to investigate. Around 2:15 a.m., I packed my flashlight and binoculars and drove out. The air was cool and dry, the sky crystal clear. By 2:25, I was at the lake bed's edge, facing the spot where these lights typically emerged. I sat quietly on the rough, parched earth. Total silence surrounded me, broken only by my breathing, an occasional rustling from nearby scrub. Then, precisely at 2:33, it happened. A faint, pale light materialized about 100 feet away, hovering inches above the ground, motionless. Curious, I swept my flashlight across it. The light didn't react. Instead, it seemed to absorb the beam completely, swallowing it as if it weren't even there. A chill ran down my spine. Something felt fundamentally wrong, and I decided against getting closer. For 10 minutes, the light remained, then vanished without warning. I returned home unsettled, feeling I'd witnessed something not meant for human observation. Strange occurrences followed. Around 2:30 a.m., my home's power would flicker briefly. My emergency CB radio would pick up odd static, a soft whisper, or low clicking that always cut out just before 2:33. When I shared these experiences with my neighbor Mike, a local history buff, he was initially skeptical. But he'd heard similar stories from older residents. Apparently, these mysterious lights had been reported over that lake bed for decades. Fleeting glimpses lasting only a minute or two, with few consistent details. We were out here on an old military testing range from the 50s and 60s, and something unexplained kept happening. A secret hovering between what we know and what we can't understand, vanishing across the stars like a phenomenon that never truly existed. The landscape was stark and unforgiving, a terrain hardly suitable for sustained habitation. For years, I'd been observing an enigmatic phenomenon that defied logical explanation. Each night, a faint light would materialize in precisely the same location, silent and unchanging. About a month into my observations, something more unsettling emerged. Through my binoculars, I spotted a shadow near the lake bed's edge. Its movement was deliberate, suggesting something was pacing or circling. It had vanished. The moment I blinked, no sound disturbed the absolute silence. My caution grew. Some nights, doubt crept in. Was loneliness and boredom conjuring these visions? But then the light would return, punctual and mesmerizing, drawing me back into vigilant observation. The most recent occurrence was a couple weeks ago. At 2:32 a.m., after checking house wiring, I retrieved my binoculars. By 2:33, the familiar glow appeared in its habitual spot. This time felt different. It seemed to linger, almost hesitating before disappearing. I awoke that morning, exhausted, enveloped in a foggy unease. No strange memories haunted me, just an inexplicable sense of disquiet. I'd systematically eliminated all logical explanations. The phenomenon was too precise to be random, yet not overtly threatening. Reporting it seemed futile. Who would believe a story about a light appearing consistently at 2:33 a.m. on an empty lake bed? So I continue watching, not every night, but frequently enough. Always with binoculars, always waiting. The light comes and goes like clockwork, quiet, distant, mysterious. The Saturday morning was just breaking over rural Vermont. Late October draped its cool, damp air across the landscape. Milo and I were on our usual walking route, moving down the lane behind our house, past the abandoned Miller farm, and into the open field stretching between the road and woods. The area had grown wild but remained Milo's favorite spot for unbridled freedom. That morning began typically. I tossed his ball, and he chased it through dew-covered grass. Thin fog hung low over the fields. The sky, a deep grey blue, had not yet been touched by sunrise, with a horizon that seemed to dissolve into mist. The distant tree line appeared blurry, softened by thick fog. Near the fence separating the field from the neighboring property, something caught my attention. A peculiar silence enveloped the morning as I walked with Milo. The usual sounds, birds, wind, distant tractors, had vanished. Something felt off. About 100 yards away, a strange shape hung suspended, 6 or 7 feet above the ground. It wasn't anything I recognized from past experiences. The object was oval-shaped, roughly the size of a small car. Its surface defied normal description, a matte chrome-like coating that seemed both dull and reflective, yet didn't gleam or mirror the surroundings. Milo's demeanor suddenly changed dramatically. He stopped moving, sat down beside me, and became completely still. His ears were alert, eyes locked onto the mysterious shape. This was completely out of character. Normally, Milo would be pulling me forward, eager to explore. No matter how many times I called his name or tugged the leash, he remained rigid and motionless. The morning fog rolled thick over the field, and within it, an unnervingly clear form stood out against the blurry landscape. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the shape vanished. I had glanced down at my watch for just a second, and when I looked back, it was gone. No sound, no movement, no disturbance in the fog, just emptiness. Milo stayed close, his tail low, repeatedly looking back at the spot where something had been moments before. We finished the walk faster than usual. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen, maybe a piece of trash or a trick of light. But when I mentioned the incident to my neighbor Hank, his reaction gave me pause. He was skeptical, insisting nothing existed in that field except some old mill scrap. Hank suggested I might have seen a phone reflection, but I knew that wasn't possible. What haunted me most was Milo's behavior. He's typically relaxed, but that morning he seemed genuinely unsettled, as if he'd witnessed something dangerous or beyond comprehension. In the days that followed, I found myself constantly scanning that field, searching for any hint of explanation. During the summer of 2019, my job as a park ranger at Mount Pisgah State Park was pretty routine. Mostly I did patrols, maintenance checks, and occasional guided hikes. Nothing extraordinary. But one morning in early July around 5 a.m., something happened that I still can't explain. My supervisor called me to investigate something in a restricted area. This section of the park was off limits due to delicate bird nesting grounds and erosion risks. The main trail ended about half a mile from my destination, so I had to navigate an old service road through dense forest. A thick fog blanketed the landscape, limiting visibility to barely 20 feet ahead. Damp air carried the scent of wet pine and earth. I carried my standard gear: boots, radio, flashlight, and notebook. The radio remained quiet except for routine morning check-ins, and no other rangers were on duty in the area. After hiking through a patch of fir and cedar trees, I stumbled upon an unmarked clearing. Right in the center was something bizarre. A perfect 10-foot circle of completely scorched grass caught my eye. The grass was black and brittle, as if burned to a crisp. Yet, strangely, nothing surrounding the circle showed any fire damage. The nearby trees and shrubs looked completely untouched. No singed bark or leaves, no smoke smell. Curious, I knelt and examined the circle's edges. The soil underneath was dry and cracked, but not in a way that suggested recent burning. It was almost as if the grass had been incinerated without the fire ever reaching the ground. I carefully circled the clearing, searching for any signs of human activity. Cigarette butts, campfires, footprints, but I found nothing. During my morning walks with Milo, I'd notice our field carefully. Everything appeared normal. Fog rolling in, grass growing, crows calling from the old trees. But sometimes, when the fog was thick, I'd get an eerie feeling of being watched. Milo's ears would twitch, and he'd stare intently at what seemed to me like empty space. I asked Hank about local stories, and he mentioned only vague legends about straw, angel lights, and sounds that nobody took seriously. The idea of returning to the field at night to investigate crossed my mind, but the memory of that silent, hovering shape and Milo's reaction kept me back. To this day, I can't explain what I saw that morning. It was silent, motionless, and disappeared without a trace, leaving behind nothing but an unsettling mystery. The clearing was unlike anything I'd seen before. A perfect circle burned into the grass, its edges so precise it looked like someone had used a giant stencil. No signs of disturbance surrounded the area. I radioed dispatch, explaining my location and the strange scene, asking if any controlled burns had been scheduled. They confirmed the park had been quiet with no unusual incidents. An unsettling silence blanketed the forest. No birds chirped, no insects buzzed. The wind had stopped completely. Early morning fog softened the landscape, but the circle remained stark and unnatural. A low, constant humming began to emerge, not from any machine or radio, but seemingly rising from the ground itself. Over the next few days, I returned with other rangers. The circle persisted. Grass scorched black, ground dry and cracked. No ash, no burnt branches, just a clean geometric ring. Mark suggested a lightning strike, but I knew that was impossible. No recent storms could create such a tidy, precise shape. Stranger details emerged. Our GPS consistently showed incorrect coordinates, shifting hundreds of feet despite multiple recalibrations. It was as if the location itself was somehow unstable. We fenced off the area, restricting public access, and reviewed perimeter cameras. Nothing unusual was recorded. No humans, no animals large enough to explain the burn marks. About a week later, during a routine patrol, a quick flash of light caught my eye through the trees. When I turned, it had vanished. Some mysteries I've learned defy explanation, and this was definitely one of them. Night was falling as we drove west on Route 2, somewhere between Alliance and Ellsworth, Nebraska. The middle of nowhere stretched out before us. We were 4 friends packed into Tanner's old Suburban, the summer heat clinging to our skin and making the vinyl seats uncomfortable. Early July, maybe 3 years back, Lacey wanted to go stargazing near the sandhills away from town lights, and Tanner was always up for a drive. Drew and I didn't mind, so we went along. We'd brought a cooler with drinks, a Bluetooth speaker, and some blankets to spread on the grass. The sky was crystal clear, no clouds, with a low amber moon rising behind us. Roads stretched endlessly, no headlights visible ahead or behind. An hour into our drive, we first noticed the lights. My mind drifted to a similar strange experience from my time as a park ranger. Once, I'd discovered a perfectly burned circle in a clearing. Park management told me to keep an eye on it, but something felt off. No smoke, no typical fire signs. Soil tests came back clean, and the grass burned in an unnatural way. I stopped mentioning it at work. It made me uneasy, like I was witnessing something I shouldn't see. Now every time I drive past that park section, I can't help looking toward the trees. Is the circle still there? Has it moved? Is it waiting? No answers. Just a strange, silent, scorched patch among the trees that night at the ranger station. After a seemingly normal day, the power had flickered briefly. It felt connected somehow. Over the next month, I kept thinking about the clearing, the silence, the humming, the odd GPS readings, the flickering lights. I'd visit occasionally, finding the clearing different each time, sometimes thick with fog, other times clear as day, but the circle remained perfect and scorched. Suddenly Lacey pointed out her window. Is that a plane? Above the fields, about a quarter mile off the road, a perfectly straight line of 5 small, white lights hung low, maybe 100 feet off the ground. Drew leaned forward from the back seat, noting something unusual. Those aren't blinking, he observed. And he was right. No navigation lights, no strobes, just steady white dots hanging motionless. Tanner instinctively slowed down. We were driving, all eyes fixed on the strange lights hanging motionless, like suspended lanterns. Gradually, they began moving, gliding smoothly and silently just off the road's right side. I rolled down the window, expecting some mechanical sound, but heard only wind, tires, and distant cricket chirps. "Too low for a plane," Lacey muttered. "Too still," Drew added. Tanner said nothing, his gaze shifting between the road and those mysterious lights. Minutes felt like hours as we watched. Then something jarring happened. The rightmost light suddenly vanished, not dimmed, not drifted away, but disappeared as if someone flipped a switch. 10 seconds later, the next light blinked out, then another. Each light winked out from right to left in precise 5-second intervals. The final light closest to the road was last to go. Tanner pulled onto the gravel shoulder. We stepped out into an eerie stillness. Insects buzzed in surrounding grass, and distant power lines hummed softly. Lacey pointed to where the lights had been. "They were right there, weren't they?" I nodded. Drew wandered into the grass, scanning the sky. "Maybe drones," he suggested half-heartedly. No one responded. Something felt different. The unnatural symmetry, the perfect stillness. This didn't feel like any drone encounter. We remained silent, each lost in private thoughts. Lacey stared out the window. Drew faced forward. I watched the sky. Tanner drove slower, his expression unreadable, seemingly anticipating something might suddenly materialize. 15 minutes later, we turned onto an old roadside area with a rusted gate and faded "no trespassing" sign. Tanner killed the engine, and an intense quiet enveloped us, the kind of silence found far from human civilization. "Let's sit here a while," he said. We wanted to see if anything else would occur. Without discussion, we grabbed blankets and spread out in the grass, looking upward. Comfort wasn't the objective. We just wanted to observe. We were stargazing that night, the Milky Way sprawling overhead like a glowing band of light. Everything seemed peaceful until Drew broke the silence. He pointed upward at a small white light moving higher than the satellites we'd been watching. At first, I thought it was just another satellite, but something felt off. The light stopped dead in its tracks. No drift, no fade, just a complete halt. Then, in a move that defied explanation, it made a sharp 90° turn and slid sideways before disappearing entirely. Lacey had spotted a shooting star earlier, but this was different. We all saw it. No one said a word. We stayed another 20 minutes, but nothing else happened. Tanner suggested we leave, and nobody argued. The drive back to Alliance was hushed. Even Lacey, who could usually talk for hours, remained silent. We tried to feel normal, stopping at McDonald's for some late-night fries, carefully avoiding any mention of what we'd witnessed. Days later, I asked Tanner if he'd ever experienced anything similar. He hadn't, but shared that his dad, a former lineman in the Sand Hills, once mentioned strange, silent lights over the prairie, though he never went into detail. Months earlier, on a cold, clear October night in 2019, I was working a solo radar shift at Epley Airfield in Omaha. After 6 years on the job, late nights were routine. Lynn was doing a perimeter check while I monitored the scopes, nursing some terrible coffee. Traffic was light, just a few commercial arrivals, a FedEx departure, and some private jets from Council Bluffs. Around 8:40 p.m., something unusual caught my attention. A single radar ping appeared west of the Missouri River near Elkhorn. I initially wrote it off as a terrain reflection, but it showed up again slightly north before vanishing. I logged it as an unknown contact, no transponder, no altitude, just a brief visual track. 4 minutes later, it reappeared east of the river, outside Omaha's Class C boundary. Its speed was incredible, as fast as a fighter jet, and, again, no transponder. I tried the emergency frequency, but got no response. Between 8:50 and 9 o'clock, the object materialized 7 times on my scope, each appearance lasting just a second or two, never consistent. During my shift, I noticed something strange on the radar. Blips flickering with 0 altitude data and no identification. No squawk, nothing. I did what anyone might do in that situation. I started screen recording. Around 9:10, I called the supervisor desk and got Darryl, an older ex-Air Force guy. I explained I had intermittent radar contact with a non-identifiable, non-transponding object moving erratically. After a long pause, he simply asked how long I'd been watching it. When I said about 30 minutes, he just told me to keep logging and take no further action. I suggested notifying Offutt Air Force Base, but he dismissed the idea, saying they'd see it if needed. His response felt rehearsed, like he'd said it before. By 9:12, the object had vanished. For nearly an hour, nothing else appeared on my scope. I ran diagnostics, checked antenna status, everything checked out green. When Lynn returned from her walk around 10:30, I described what I'd seen. Her response was dismissive. Was it the river again? I insisted it was moving all over the place. She grew quiet, then cryptically mentioned we get stuff like that maybe once or twice a year, and that they'd tell us not to chase it. When I pressed her about who they were, she just shrugged. After finishing my midnight shift, I loaded the screen recording onto a USB. Though 24 minutes long, most was dead air. The object only appeared in 6 or 7 brief moments. Watching those moments repeatedly, I noticed the track lines were jagged and inconsistent, almost like the object was skipping. The radar system isn't designed to track fast-moving targets at those angles. Yet, even accounting for that, something seemed impossible. The movement defied logic. It jumped from north of the airport to south, then out toward Bell, even crossing the river again. Some jumps covered over 20 m in less than 10 seconds. At one point, the object jumped nearly 30 m from Fort Calhoun to east of Pillion in just 5 seconds. The next night, I discovered my screen recording had lights blinking out one by one, as if someone was deliberately switching them off. I searched everywhere for confirmation afterward. No news articles, no air traffic reports, nothing online. It was like the entire incident never happened, except I knew what I'd seen. I still think about that night, wondering what I witnessed. When we were camping near Black Mesa, just west of the Colorado-New Mexico border at the end of September, everything seemed normal at first. Days were still warm, but nights dropped hard. 5 of us made the trip. Me, my cousin Nathan, his girlfriend Emily, and our friends Felix and Dan. We set up 3 tents in a fire pit made from scavenged rocks, nothing fancy. After hiking about 3 miles off a dirt access road, we were ready to get away from everything. The first day and night went smoothly. We hiked, made dinner over the fire, drank cheap beer, and shared some weed. Around 10, we sprawled on the rocks looking up. Nathan, who's into astronomy, pointed out Saturn and constellations. We all had digital watches, my Casio atomic watch, and Nathan and Emily's, and we checked them all perfectly synced. I went to my solo tent around midnight while the others stayed up longer. I remember waking up cold around 2:30, pulling my hoodie over my face. Desert nights are freezing. Then I woke with an intense pressure behind my eyes and blood on my upper lip. When I wiped my nose, it came away red, not gushing, just a slow bleed from dry air. But something felt off. It burned with a weird metallic taste like ozone, hard to describe. That same night, our radar system rebooted at 2 a.m., which was unusual unless there's a firmware update or a fault. I checked the update log. No update had been pushed. No new blips, no odd readings. Everything seemed normal, but I still have the screen recording. I've watched it countless times. The blips didn't follow any standard flight pattern. They jumped point to point clean, like skipping a stone across the screen. Whatever it was didn't belong in our airspace and didn't act like anything I've ever tracked. Later, I noticed my logbook entry had vanished. I always write in blue ink, but the page was now entirely in black, my entry completely removed. When I asked Darryl about it, he suggested I must have forgotten to write it down. When I insisted I had, claimed the page might have been torn, which wasn't true. I stepped outside for water and noticed something immediately off. The air was unnaturally still. No bugs, no wind, just complete silence. The sky was a deep black dotted with stars, but something felt wrong. The Big Dipper was missing, which struck me as strange. I always looked for it automatically, and this time it simply wasn't there. The sky hung dark as midnight, even though my watch read 6:12 a.m. Camp was silent, with no stirring in any of the tents. Cold ash filled the fire pit, with just a faint glow beneath a few remaining coals. Back in my tent, I discovered both my phone and backup flashlight were dead, despite being charged before our trip. Something felt off physically, like a strange mix of jet lag and altitude sickness, though we weren't at any significant elevation. My balance seemed compromised, with the ground appearing to tilt subtly. Each movement required careful correction to keep steady. I settled on a rock about 10 feet from our campsite and waited. Sunrise finally began around 5:50, according to other watchers, while mine still showed past 6:30. When everyone awoke, I observed quietly at first. Emily inquired about the time. Nathan said 6:04, but my watch read 6:45. "Your watch is fast," he claimed. I disagreed, showing the sync screen that confirmed recent updates before our departure. Nathan suggested I might have accidentally bumped something, but I knew my watch. It doesn't randomly shift 41 minutes. Seeking validation, I asked if anyone else had experienced anything unusual. Dan had slept soundly, and Felix only mentioned a slight headache from drinking. My mentions of a nosebleed and time discrepancy were mostly dismissed as effects of dry air or campfire smoke. Yet something fundamental felt wrong, though I couldn't articulate exactly what. Let me provide some context. I'm Danny from Hemp, and Joshua Tree is just a short drive away. This particular weekend, all my friends had backed out of our planned trip. Undeterred, I decided to go solo. I parked in a small pull-off, just wide enough for my car, and hiked about 10 minutes up a flat ridge. No real trail existed, just boulders and open scrub. I wasn't technically supposed to camp there, but I wasn't setting up a tent. My goal was simple: capture some night sky photographs before heading home. For the past year, I've been practicing night sky shots. Nothing professional, just a hobby. My gear was set up to capture long exposures of the Milky Way. I'd been taking photographs for maybe 45 minutes when something happened. The nighttime sky held my attention as I'd grown familiar with its rhythms. Familiar constellations, occasional satellites, and an earlier faint meteor had been my companions. But something felt different. One point of light between Vega and Dem began moving in a way that was immediately strange. Its motion was slow and smooth, nothing like a typical plane or meteor. For about 10 seconds it traveled in a straight line, then made a sharp 90-degree turn, not an arc, but an angle as precise as a grid line. I initially thought it might be a satellite adjusting its orbit, but then it turned again, tracing another perfect right angle like an invisible square's edge. I grabbed my camera from the tripod, trying to focus, but by the time I looked through the viewfinder, it had stopped, hanging motionless. When it moved again, the motion was even more deliberate, a slow diagonal followed by another turn. This wasn't satellite behavior. It wasn't tracking the Earth's curve. Instead, it moved in rigid geometric shapes, like someone methodically drawing on graph paper. For 3 or 4 minutes, this pattern continued. Earlier that day, subtle oddities had set me on edge. Birds were unusually quiet. We'd found a dead rabbit that looked strange. No bugs, no smell. Something felt off, though I couldn't explain why. That night, I barely slept, staying outside my tent with a headlamp and camera set up on a tripod. Running a time-lapse from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m., I hadn't seen anything with my own eyes, but the camera caught a peculiar detail. At 3:17, a faint blur crossed the middle of the shot, a soft, perfectly horizontal line, almost too faint to notice. It wasn't a plane trail or satellite, no flaring, no direction, just a pale smear of light. The next shot, 30 seconds later, showed the sky back to normal. When I showed Nathan the photo the next morning, he dismissed it as a lens flare. I didn't argue. Back at the cars, something else strange happened. My watch, when synced with my phone's app, jumped back exactly 41 minutes. Not 40, not 42, but precisely 41. I've never understood why. Hours of driving had worn me down after helping my sister move to Austin. My truck was my home when needed, and I was somewhere along Route 62. Not far from 29 Palms, close to 1:30 in the morning, I pulled off onto a dirt shoulder. No lights, no other vehicles, just the wide-open desert. The stars overhead glimmered, and dry air surrounded me with that low hum of absolute silence. I cracked the driver's window a few inches and shut off the engine. The desert has a way of distorting time, and I know how easy it is to zone out without realizing. I thought I'd only been sitting there for a minute or two, but when I looked back at the sky, something felt different. The summer triangles seemed altered. A star appeared to have moved or vanished entirely. I took a few pictures, but my earlier enthusiasm had faded. The landscape felt uncomfortably still. As I packed up my gear, a single light caught my attention far to the north, beyond the park boundary. At first I assumed it was a plane, but it remained motionless. A soft, steady white glow without the typical aircraft strobes. I watched from beside my car for several minutes. The light didn't change, didn't move. Starting the engine, I began driving back toward the main road, checking my rearview mirror frequently. The light remained exactly where it had been, not following, not approaching, just present. Once I passed the bend, I attempted a long exposure to capture its path, but before the shutter could close, it vanished. Not drifted away, not faded, simply blinked out, one moment present, the next gone. The surrounding stars remained, the sky looking exactly the same. Standing in the darkness, camera pressed against my chest, I felt oddly detached. Not scared exactly, but that strange sensation of walking into a room and forgetting why, or noticing silence after a noise stops. I decided to take a break and sit on a nearby boulder, pulling out my water bottle and checking my phone. No signal as expected. The time read 3:19 a.m. I only noted this because when I looked again later, it was 3:21 though. It felt like much more time had passed. The Mojave night stretched out before me, silent and vast. The first hint of something strange came when I woke up, noticing the clock read 5:42 a.m., yet the sky remained pitch black. Hours earlier, I dozed off around 1:30 a.m. with my last phone check at 1:47 a.m. The timeline didn't add up. Nearly 4 hours should have passed, but the darkness suggested otherwise. My truck sat in complete silence, an unsettling stillness enveloping everything. The windows caught my attention first, covered in a thick, strange fog that made no sense. This wasn't condensation from breathing inside the vehicle. The air had been bone dry when I parked, with zero humidity. Cautiously, I wiped a spot on the windshield from the inside, which remained clear, confirming the fog was definitely external. Walking slowly around the vehicle, I examined the windows more closely. The fog appeared in long, even swipes, almost like deliberate cleaning strokes. Some areas showed finger-like streaks, as if someone had meticulously wiped the glass from the outside. I crouched and checked underneath. No footprints, no disturbances in the hard-packed dirt and gravel. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional tick of the cooling engine. A strange unease settled in my stomach. I hesitated to turn on the dome light, feeling an inexplicable reluctance to illuminate whatever might be outside. The entire scene felt surreal. Windows mysteriously fogged in the middle of a desert night with no evidence of anyone's presence. Near Ryan Mountain, the experience had vanished, replaced by trees, rocks, and darkness. I didn't immediately share what happened, not out of fear of disbelief, but because I couldn't articulate what I'd witnessed. Days later, I showed a coworker the long exposure photos. They appeared normal, clean starfields with nothing unusual, but I knew what I saw. That star had moved with an unnatural, deliberate slowness, as if guided by something beyond our understanding. Since that night, I haven't returned to that place. The drive to 29 Palms felt like a blink, and something was off about the truck. Strange sensations hit me immediately. The windows were fogged and wiped clean, with an odd metallic smell hanging in the air like ozone. Empty road stretched behind me when I glanced in the rearview mirror. Everything seemed normal when I started driving. Headlights cut through dirt and low shrubs as I pulled back onto the road. 5 minutes later, I noticed the radio display had completely reset time presets gone, as if the battery had been disconnected. I hadn't touched anything. My phone's clock was equally bizarre, its time not matching the darkness outside. I tried rationalizing the inconsistencies. Maybe mountain shadows were blocking sunlight, or I'd simply lost track of time. But something felt fundamentally wrong. Just after 6 a.m., I reached 29 Palms with the sun finally up. At a gas station, I grabbed coffee and used the bathroom. While washing my hands, I caught my reflection and spotted a thin red mark high near my jaw. It looked like a pressure line from a tight seatbelt, but I'd only been wearing a hoodie with no collar. Suddenly, everything unnerved me. The fogged windows, white glass, strange smell, and time discrepancies defied explanation. I sought rational theories. Perhaps someone had tampered with the truck while I slept, or the battery had glitched. But I'd slept in this truck many times in different locations and never seen windows fogged like this, especially not in a dry desert with no humidity and no breath inside. I drove straight home that day, stopping only for gas. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I meticulously checked every inch of the truck. No damage, no missing items, but that faint metallic smell still clung to the fabric, even with windows rolled down most of the way. Earlier that month, Carl and I had gone night fishing at Goose Hollow Lake in northeastern Pennsylvania. The lake sits in a quiet area with few people around. We were out in a shallow north end cove using his small aluminum boat with an electric trolling motor, a perfect bass spot with lily pads and deadfalls scattered about. The evening was unusually warm, still in the low 70s after sunset. We sat on the bench seats, drinking warm beer and casting lines as darkness settled in. The sun had gone down around 7:15, and by 8, night had fully consumed the landscape. The lake lay dark and still, its water like glass beneath a clear sky studded with stars. Carl and I noticed something immediately. The silence was absolute. No bugs buzzed, no frogs croaked, no fish broke the water's surface, which was odd for this area. "You hear that?" Carl asked, gesturing around. He was right. Our voices seemed unnaturally loud in the dead quiet. Only the water lapping against our boat broke the silence. We listened intently for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Then a light appeared through the trees on the lake's east side. It wasn't bright, more a dull amber, like a distant street lamp. But it was moving, gliding smoothly left to right above the tree line. No blinking, no strobing, just steady, quiet movement. At first I thought it might be a drone, but its motion was too perfect, as if riding invisible tracks. Carl stood slowly, his hand on my shoulder. "You seeing that?" he asked. I nodded. We watched the light drift across the treetops for maybe 15 or 20 seconds before it vanished behind the trees. Seconds later, it reappeared on the west side. Same amber glow, same silent glide. But something felt wrong. No way anything could cross a mile of dense forest and water that quickly. No sound, no flash. Just there, then not, then there again. The light moved slower now, seeming to scan something. Then it stopped completely, suspended motionless above the trees. No sway, no drift, just frozen in place. Then it was gone. Not fading, not flying away. 1 second present, the next vanished. No trail, no noise. We sat in stunned silence for a long time. Carl finally reeled in his line and suggested we head back. I agreed. The strangest part came when we checked our devices. My watch said 9:22. Carl showed 10:03. My phone read 10:39. We'd only brought 3 beers and weren't drunk. That night haunted me. The next night, I dreamed of a bright white light. Close and soundless, it hung above me. I'm still not sure if it was a real dream or something left over from that night. Either way, I haven't slept in the truck since. The Blue Ridge Mountains in early October offered a perfect escape. I'd taken a week off work, seeking solitude and a chance to clear my head. Most people didn't even know I was out here. Midday brought cool, sunny weather with temperatures hovering around the mid-60s. I was hiking a lesser-used trail near Dotton Park, about 6 miles from the trailhead. The kind of path where you might walk all day without seeing another soul. At an overlook where the trees thinned out, I stopped for a quick break. The view stretched across the valley to the next ridge, maybe a mile away. Sitting on a flat rock, I was scanning the landscape when something caught my eye. A shiny object hung motionless just above the tree line. It looked like a piece of chrome suspended in the air, not wobbling, not moving, just hanging there. My first thought was a drone, but it seemed too large and made no sound. No rotors, no movement, just a small silver dot reflecting sunlight like a perfectly angled mirror. I watched it for what might have been 10 or 30 seconds. Hard to tell. When I looked down to grab a protein bar from my pack, the thing vanished. Not moved, completely gone. Scanning the ridge revealed nothing. Then I noticed the silence. Before, the forest had been alive with sound. Chickadees, distant woodpeckers, the usual background noise you stop hearing after a while. Now, absolutely nothing. No rustling, no insects, just wind. I could hear my own blood pumping. It wasn't that the animals had scattered in fear. They just seemed to have stopped, like someone had paused them. Days later, this experience reminded me of another strange encounter. Carl and I had been out on a lake, and the trolling motor ran fine. But somehow, 2 hours had passed without either of us noticing. On the return trip, I kept looking back, half expecting to see the light again. The lake remained dark, no bugs, no sound. At the shore, everything looked normal. Truck there, gear dry, keys in my pocket, but even the truck's clock was off, showing 12:12 with no explanation. We drove home mostly quiet. Carl looked pale. We were both trying to rationalize it. Maybe a drone, maybe something ordinary. But the lake's dead silence before the light appeared, and the unexplained time loss kept nagging at us. Carl later mentioned attempting to find the cove during daylight. His GPS wouldn't stabilize, jumping erratically. His compass app spun in slow circles regardless of direction. Me? I haven't been back to that lake since. The silence hit me like a wall. I stood up, slowly turning, straining to hear anything. No footsteps, no breeze, nothing. This wasn't normal. Woods don't just go quiet like this. Something felt wrong, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. I tried to make sense of it, rationalize what I was experiencing. Maybe I'd imagined the reflection earlier, maybe the birds were just resting. Eventually, I packed up and continued my hike, though the strange encounter kept playing in my mind. I was on a connector trail, knowing I wouldn't cover my original planned distance but still getting a decent trek in. About an hour later, I stopped at a narrow switchback with a clear view of the ridge where I'd seen something unusual before. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just pausing to catch my breath. Then a strange sound caught my attention. A faint hum that didn't make sense. No power lines, no buildings, no roads, just dense woods. The sound wasn't constant, more like a pressure behind my ears that pulsed every few seconds. I held my breath to check if the sound was coming from me. It remained unchanged, low and barely perceptible, almost like a deep tinnitus. Scanning the sky revealed nothing. No planes, no contrails, no birds. In fact, I realized I hadn't seen a single bird since the earlier overlook, not even the usual crows. My pace quickened. The trail was overgrown in spots, and I nearly missed the turnoff where the sign had fallen. Backtracking cost me about 15 minutes. Throughout this, the hum continued steady now, following me like a persistent headache just behind my skull. Near the parking lot, I encountered a couple hiking in the opposite direction. They looked like serious hikers, fully equipped with packs and trekking poles. We exchanged brief hellos. I almost asked about any strange occurrences but decided against it, just wanting to return. As I approached the trailhead, the hum vanished. No dramatic ending, just a quiet fade. Suddenly, the woods seemed to come alive again. A cardinal chirped nearby, and a squirrel darted across the path. The parking lot had only 2 vehicles, my car and an old Suburban, likely belonging to the hiking couple. Standing beside my car, I let my heart rate settle. Though I hadn't run, I felt inexplicably wired. My shirt was damp with sweat despite the cool air. During the drive back to my rented cabin, my thoughts kept returning to that earlier sighting. Driving west on Route 36 outside Decatur, Illinois, the October night was warm and dark. Farmland surrounded us, broken only by occasional farmhouse lights and our high beams cutting through the darkness. My girlfriend Natalie dozed in the passenger seat as I navigated the monotonous landscape of soybean fields, grain silos, and scattered barns. Something caught my eye in the field to the right. At first I thought it might be a combine or tower light, but this was different. A pale yellowish-white glow moved low to the ground at tree height. About the size of a beach ball, it glided smoothly parallel to the car, maybe 50 or 60 yards off the road. Its movement was unnaturally precise, not like a metallic plane or a dull balloon, but more reminiscent of polished glass or chrome. No strobing, no blinking, no sound. It wasn't bouncing like a drone would. Instead, it floated perfectly, matching our speed with eerie smoothness. I nudged Natalie awake. "There's something out there," I said. She sat up, looked out the window, and after a moment asked, "Is that a light?" We slowed down slightly, and the light continued its steady movement alongside us. "Should I pull over?" I asked. She nodded. I eased onto the gravel shoulder and stopped, turning on the hazards. The moment we stopped, the light began to dim, not abruptly, but gradually, like a flashlight's batteries dying. Natalie grabbed her phone, rolled down the window, and tried to record. But by the time she hit record, nothing remained, just the dark outline of the field, something that simply didn't belong. We sat motionless, listening to the quiet punctuated only by the cooling hood's faint ticking. A single dog bark broke the stillness, echoing from a nearby farm before fading away. The field stretched out around us, silent, except for the soft rustle of corn stalks and distant cricket sounds. "I saw it, right?" she asked, checking her phone. "No video. I kept the experience to myself for a while. I didn't want to sensationalize it. Maybe it was just a drone. Perhaps the silence was mere coincidence, or maybe I had imagined the entire thing. But I've hiked that route 5 or 6 times since, and I've never encountered that kind of absolute silence again. Not once." We were driving near a cornfield when something caught my attention. I stepped out of the car onto the shoulder, feeling an odd sensation. The air seemed thick and strange. Not quite cold, but dense, like the atmosphere before a storm. Darkness enveloped everything around me. Natalie's voice broke through my thoughts. "Get back in the car," she said, her gaze fixed beyond me. When I turned, I caught a brief glimpse of a faint glow hovering low above the field, maybe 5 or 6 feet up. About 100 yards out, it disappeared instantly, like a light fading to black. We sat motionless, an unspoken tension between us. Something was watching, waiting. The moment didn't feel threatening, just unusual. I eventually started driving, breaking the silence. Natalie kept looking back at the field. Minutes later, near a county road intersection, movement flickered behind a tree line. Maybe deer, maybe shadows. We remained quiet. In Riverton, we stopped for gas. The earlier encounter lingered like a half-remembered dream. This wasn't my first time tracking weather. Near Hinton, Oklahoma, I was following a late spring storm forming west of the Canadian River. Nothing major, just isolated cells that would light up the plains. I'm not a professional storm chaser, just someone with a decent camera and too much time in his truck. Around 6:30 in the early June evening, the sky was bruising southwest with purples and pale green edges. I parked on a dirt road next to a cattle fence, about 10 miles from town. An open field of wheat or wild grass stretched out, completely flat with no obstructions. Perfect. I set up my tripod facing the storm line and started recording. Standing with a remote, I captured stills of lightning strikes. The storm moved slowly. Distant thunder rolled through my chest and the air smelled sharp. Ozone, dust, damp heat. Every few minutes a bolt would reach down far away. About 40 minutes in, one strike hit the field directly ahead, maybe a couple 100 yards out. It wasn't the brightest, but close enough that the sound followed the flash in barely a second. A big crack like a board splitting. A growl rumbled from beneath the ground, followed by a sharp snapping sound. It was startling, but I kept filming. Something dumb slipped out of my mouth, almost like a nervous laugh. Just after midnight, we rolled into Springfield and found a cheap motel near the highway. Sleep was restless. Every hour, I'd wake up and check the window, half expecting something to be hovering in the parking lots. Morning came, and we barely spoke about what happened. We tried convincing ourselves it was farm equipment or a trick of light, but we both knew something was off. We haven't driven that route since. No planes, no blinking red lights appeared. I kept scanning the horizon, waiting for that strange glow to return. It never did. The storm had dissipated, and the light was fading when I packed up around 8. Back at my rental house in Eleno, I transferred the footage to my laptop over dinner. That night, I only skimmed the video, grabbing a few clips and planning a proper edit for the morning. When I opened the file the next day, I started examining the lightning strike frame by frame. The lightning itself was quick, just 5 or 6 frames, but something in the frame before caught my attention. At first, I thought it might be a camera glitch. My camera isn't top of the line, but it's usually dependable. Zooming in revealed a distinct shape, not a light or a smudge, but a dark object. Disc-shaped, horizontal, slightly tilted, hovering about 20 feet above the grass, right in the center of the frame. I stared for a full minute, then re-watched the section. The shape appeared suddenly, one frame of grass and dim sky, then this object followed immediately by lightning. I tried to rationalize it. A bird? A drone? Something on the lens? Nothing fit. No wings, no blur, no rotor blades. Just a flat, dark grey oval with soft edges, almost as if it was absorbing light. Checking time codes and slowing the video down, I confirmed this was the only anomaly. No other sensor errors or strange artifacts existed in the entire recording. I attempted to recreate the shape by adjusting contrast, shadows, and saturation in other video stills, but couldn't replicate it. That night, sleep was impossible. I was home alone one night in late October about 2 years ago, living in this small suburban Cleveland neighborhood, the kind of place where you know your neighbors, but not really. Quiet streets, older houses, mostly families, and retired folks. Nothing too exciting ever happens there. At least that's what I thought. It was close to midnight when I first noticed it. The humming low, barely noticeable at first, like the distant buzz of a transformer, or maybe a generator somewhere nearby. I was sitting on the couch watching some late-night show when I heard it. It wasn't steady. The sound kind of pulsed like a slow vibration. I paused the show and listened, thinking maybe it was just my imagination or something usual like the heating system. 2 months ago, I went storm chasing and found something strange. The same road and field stretched out before me. Clear skies, no storms on the radar. Walking to the spot where I believed the lightning struck, I found no dramatic burn marks, just a small patch of grass that looked oddly flattened, as if something heavy had hovered close to the ground. The grass was pressed down in a wide circle, maybe 8 or 10 feet across. Edges not sharp, but noticeable. No scorch marks, no smell, just that odd shallow depression. I walked the field for an hour, looking for anything else. Metal, wires, something that might have caused the shape. Nothing. No footprints except mine. No tire tracks. No signs of equipment. On the way back to the truck, I felt not watched exactly, but like I'd forgotten something. Like when you leave the house and feel like the stove's still on, that nagging nervous weight in your gut. I sat in the cab for a while before I left, just staring out at the field. When I got home, I tried showing the frame to my brother, who's way more into camera tech than me. I didn't tell him what I thought it looked like, just asked if he could explain it. He stared at it for a bit and said it didn't look like any sort of digital artifact he was familiar with. Said it looked inserted, not by editing, but like something actually in the scene that the camera happened to catch for a blink. I asked if a lightning flash could somehow create a visual echo or reflection, but he shook his head. Not without light. This is a dark shape. I haven't gone storm casing since. I haven't deleted the footage. But I haven't watched it again either. It's just sitting in a folder on my desktop labeled Hinton Field. The street lights caught my attention first, blinking in a sequence that felt deliberate. 2 near my house, 3 down the block, 1 across the street. The pattern seemed more like communication than a random electrical glitch. Midnight in October, and the neighborhood was dead silent. I called out, hoping someone might be witnessing this strange display. Nothing. No response, no movement. Just a persistent humming vibrating through the cold air. The sound was mechanical, deep and steady, with no clear origin. Checking the breaker box revealed nothing unusual, yet the low hum continued. I tried calling the utility company, but the phone just rang endlessly. No automated message, no recording. Something felt fundamentally wrong. In the days that followed, I started asking neighbors about that night. Karen, who lived across the street, looked at me like I was crazy. No one else had seen or heard anything unusual. Each conversation made me doubt my own experience. Yet every night, I found myself watching. The streetlights continued their cryptic signaling. Sometimes quiet, sometimes loud. The pattern never repeated exactly, always shifting, always just on the edge of making sense. The hum persisted, a constant background noise that seemed to hint at something just beyond understanding. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was witnessing something significant, something nobody else was seeing. Sometimes at night, in complete silence, I'd think about how that thing only showed up in one frame, like it was visible for 1/100th of a second. The lightning had lit it up for a split moment, and then it was gone. Was I imagining it? Was there something happening that only I could detect? I'd started keeping careful notes, tracking the unpredictable patterns. Sometimes it lasted just 5 minutes, other times nearly an hour. There was no rhyme or reason to it, no connection to weather or any specific trigger. That low, vibrating hum seemed to resonate deep inside my chest, accompanied by a slow, methodical flickering. About a month into these occurrences, everything intensified. Lying in bed one night, I heard the humming grow. The questions lingered as mysterious as the flickering lights themselves. The world outside seemed suspended, leaving me trapped in this moment. Streetlights began flickering back to life, slowly illuminating one by one. The hum returned, but weaker this time. Signals restored. Clocks resumed ticking. When I called the utility company, a recording claimed no outages had been reported. Earlier, something felt different with the streetlights. They were pulsing in perfect unison like a synchronized heartbeat. Then gradually each bulb went dark, leaving empty poles standing silently. I stood frozen, watching. The hum cut out completely as if someone had flipped a switch. My phone had no signal, no bars, no Wi-Fi. The entire block seemed disconnected from the world. My car radio produced only static. Darkness and silence surrounded me. Sleep eluded me that night. Something felt off, like I was being observed or tested. Though I had no concrete evidence, I stopped sharing these experiences. People dismissed my stories or quickly changed the subject. They seemed to think I was imagining things or losing my grip on reality. The flickering and humming continued sporadically over the next 6 months, sometimes frequent, sometimes vanishing for weeks. No one else on the street noticed these strange occurrences. I even approached local police about potential reports of unusual lights or sounds, but they treated me like I was wasting their time. Occasionally, while driving home at night, I glimpsed similar flickering streetlights on other blocks. My phone showed a full battery, yet remained dead. Even my clock had stopped. An eerie sense of isolation washed over me. I wanted desperately to contact someone, anyone, but nothing worked. We were hiking through the canyon in late June, the kind of weekend getaway Mark and I desperately needed. 2 hours into our trek, we found the perfect campsite. A flat ledge halfway up the canyon wall overlooking a dry wash. The day was hot, but the night promised to be cool enough for comfortable sleeping. Our plan was straightforward. Hike in Friday morning, camp Friday night, and return Saturday afternoon. We carried our standard gear, tents, food, water, and some firewood we gathered along the way. The trail was dusty and narrow, but not too challenging. We settled into our campsite by mid-afternoon, the fire crackling as the canyon walls transformed with shifting sunlight. Mark's jokes kept our spirits light, and I tried pushing work stress from my mind. The silence around us felt different, not empty, but alive, as if the land itself was breathing. Around 9 p.m., we relaxed on our sleeping pads, the fire low, staring up at a Milky Way impossible to see back in the city. Suddenly, Faint, muffled voices caught my attention. They weren't clear, just a jumble of distant sounds blending like multiple conversations. Maybe 5 or 6 seconds of indistinct noise before everything went quiet. "Hey, you talking?" I asked Mark. He looked confused. "No, man." "What?" The sound was strange, like voices underwater or behind a thick wall. It wasn't coming from the canyon floor or our ledge, but seemed to be directly above us. I looked up, expecting to see campers or some source of the sound. Nothing. No flashlights, no movement, just stars and sky. I whispered to Mark, "Did you hear that?" He nodded, his face pale, trying to lighten the mood. I joked about aliens. Mark's nervous laugh told me he was more unsettled than he wanted to admit. The noise wasn't wind or animal sounds, and it didn't match any echo from below. It was right above our heads, clear and distinct. Later that night, I discovered my emergency weather radio was completely dead. The screen remained black no matter how many times I tried switching it on and off. Mark's phone had no signal, which wasn't unusual, but the radio always worked out here. Something felt off. The darkness felt heavy and I kept looking up, scanning the sky for something. We didn't talk much after that. Morning brought normality back. Sunlight warmed the canyon. Birds sang their usual songs. We packed up and started hiking out, but Mark kept looking over his shoulder like we were being watched. I still don't know what it was, what I heard, what I saw, but it was real enough to make me question everything about that quiet place. The rest of the neighborhood looks normal, and no one else seems to care. Those strange, unexplained sounds no one else noticed. The return trip was strangely quiet. My mind raced with possible explanations. Perhaps canyon acoustics, pure exhaustion, or something more inexplicable. But the voices from the previous night haunted me, feeling distinctly out of place. Even now, I can't rationalize what we heard. Was it wildlife, hidden people, an atmospheric anomaly, or something beyond comprehension? It remains an unsolved mystery, the only unexplained sound I've ever encountered. Weeks before this, I was working a late-night pizza delivery shift just outside Portland. Early October brought that penetrating damp chill, and suburban streets lay empty beneath maple trees shedding their leaves. My radio played softly as I drove, tires occasionally crunching fallen foliage. Porch lights were out, houses set back on spacious lots. Halfway down the block, something unusual caught my attention. A small dark shape hung near the road's edge, suspended about 20 feet ahead and 6-7 feet above the ground. Initially, I thought it might be a drone. Perhaps a neighborhood kid experimenting after dark. I slowed down and watched carefully. The object remained completely motionless, unlike any drone I'd previously seen. No blinking lights, no movement. I rolled down the window and silenced the radio, straining to hear any sound. Absolute silence enveloped me for about 20 seconds. Then, it began rotating, slowly at first, with an unnervingly smooth and precise movement. This wasn't the typical drone bobbing in the wind, but something deliberate, almost methodical, as if scanning the surrounding area. Suddenly, without warning, it shot vertically straight up, like someone had pressed a supernatural fast-forward button. No sound, no buzzing, just an impossible ascent that defied everything I understood about flying objects. In an instant, it vanished into a thin layer of wispy clouds. One moment present, the next completely gone. My heart raced as I stared at the grey sky. The clouds were too thin to completely obscure anything. Nothing made sense. I continued my deliveries, but an unsettling feeling persisted, as if something was watching me. Strange occurrences began to mount. Headlights would appear behind me, only to disappear when I looked back. The road was always empty. I'd been noticing strange things around the apartment for days. Small, unsettling details that didn't quite add up. A kitchen drawer slightly ajar when I was sure I'd closed it. A book mysteriously shifted on the shelf. I mentioned these odd occurrences to my roommate Dan, who just brushed them off with a laugh. That night, a faint humming seeped through the apartment walls. Each time I investigated, everything appeared normal. Doors and windows remained securely locked. Late one July night, I was flying my small Cessna over Oregon's rural landscape. The sky was crystal clear, and the day's heat still lingered in the cabin. Just another routine flight to maintain my pilot's license. Around 11:15 p.m., something unusual caught my attention out the left window. Initially, I thought it was another aircraft, but something felt different. The shape was dark, almost completely black against the night sky. No navigation lights, no strobes, no sound. The kind of silence that stands out precisely because everything else sounds completely normal. When I shifted my gaze for a better look, the object was about 300 yards away, flying alongside me and matching my speed perfectly. Its movement was extraordinary. Unlike any aircraft I'd seen, it tilted sharply, banking into turns no regular plane could manage. Its motion was smooth and steady, almost as if it was slipping effortlessly through the air. I double-checked my instruments. Airspeed, altitude, all normal. No erratic readings, no turbulence. The strange shape remained, moving in sync with me. I attempted to radio the unknown traffic, Cessna N8453P, to unknown traffic. Identify yourself. I hit the transmit button 3 times, but received nothing, no call sign, no response. Not even static. Then, in an instant, it vanished. Not fading, not flying into the distance. Simply gone. As if it had never existed. The cockpit felt different. The silence seemed heavier, the air thicker. Staying calm, I radioed Portland Approach to report the sighting. They confirmed no other traffic on radar and no unidentified objects. When I provided my position again and inquired about anything unusual, the response was the same, nothing out of the ordinary. Back home in Riverside, I was sorting through our week-long Mojave field survey drone files, cataloging desert tortoise habitats near Amboy Crater. The landscape stretched endlessly, nothing but heat and dust for miles from any highway. Most footage was routine and boring, until one clip made me stop cold. Something was wrong with this frame, unnaturally still. No wind, no birds, not a single rabbit crossing the rocks. The recording was from 6:40 a.m., just as sunlight started stretching shadows thin. While skipping through 5-second jumps, a shadow caught my eye. It glided across the rocks from left to right. Big, perfectly round, smooth as glass, like a pitch-black spotlight moving slowly, maybe 10 feet every second. Completely silent. No objects in the sky, nothing above it. I paused, scrolled back, played again. A perfect 20-foot wide circle sliding across the landscape that didn't match the sun's angle or shape. This wasn't a drone shadow. I know our shadows, and this was different. The GPS timestamp confirmed a solo flight with no other team members around. Initially, I thought it might be a lens issue. I've seen weird digital glitches before, but this was no digital artifact. Something else entirely. Other strange encounters started flooding back. Pilots at my local flying club had shared similar stories. One described a dark shape moving in impossible ways. Another mentioned unexplained radio static during a night flight. During my own flights, I sometimes catch glimpses of something moving at impossible angles, always silent, always just at the edge of the lights. I reported the incident to the FAA. They brushed it off with standard explanations about optical illusions and atmospheric conditions, but I can't shake the feeling that something is out there watching. The drone footage was haunting. A shadow passed behind a boulder, partially disappearing and then reappearing on the other side. It seemed to have depth, interacting with the terrain in ways that defied logic. To rule out technical issues, I pulled the drone from its case, checking for scratches or lens problems. Nothing seemed out of order. I ran the footage through another program, but the anomaly remained. They said I must have imagined it. But I know what I saw that night. Definitely not a drone. Whatever it wasn't here for fun. The drone footage started haunting me weeks after capturing it. During an early morning flight over Barstow, the camera stuttered. Not a technical glitch, but a brief, strange dip. A round shadow, about 5 feet across, swept in from the top left, vanishing before the drone completed its pass. Checking the logs confirmed no scheduled air traffic or other drones nearby. This flight was over 60 miles from the first, with a different team. I showed my brother, who had experience with survey drones. He barely glanced at it, muttering that it wasn't from my drone or the flight, and handed it back without further comment. Something felt off. 2 days later, I drove back alone. The GPS indicated the drone's position over a dry wash about 3 miles east of the crater. By mid-morning, I had hiked to the exact spot from the footage. The boulder remained, the wash unchanged. Walking where the shadow had moved, I found no burn marks, impressions, or tracks. Silence struck me as unnatural. Desert quiet is one thing, but this was different. No wind, no insects, no distant plane hum. It felt like sound itself had been muted. As I paced, searching for any explanation, trying to convince myself it was just a technical glitch, a brief crackle broke the silence from the south, like a walkie-talkie switching on for half a second. I called out, "Nothing." I waited. Still nothing. As I started walking toward the sound, a strange pressure built in my chest. The air felt heavy, wrong. Something told me to stop. I turned back to the truck, leaving whatever mystery lingered there unresolved. That night, I watched the entire clip carefully. A faint crackling noise caught my attention like distant radio static, barely audible through the drone's mediocre microphone. The sound lasted just a second or two, cutting out precisely when the shadow vanished. The next day I called Heather, who managed the flight logs, careful not to reveal my growing unease. I casually asked if she remembered any area that morning. She confirmed the airspace was clear, no scheduled passes, and no chance of random traffic. We were completely isolated, surrounded only by tortoises and sand. Curiosity led me to review old footage from previous months. 2 clips from Arizona and near Ridgerist stood out, both marked by strange audio static and unexpected camera movements. No shadows were visible, yet the pattern felt disturbingly familiar. Silent mornings, brief audio crackles, and subtle gimbal shifts. I kept these observations private. In my profession, reporting mysterious desert shadows would only undermine my credibility. This was my livelihood, after all. Last week, everything shifted during a thermal rig test near Goffs on a blistering afternoon. With 2 grad students, I launched a final drone flight to capture overhead imagery before the light faded. Just 3 minutes into the flight, the video feed abruptly cut to black for 2 seconds before returning. The drone showed no errors and maintained its position. Upon reviewing the footage that evening, something extraordinary emerged. The black frame wasn't empty. A dark dome consumed almost the entire screen, with faint terrain edges barely visible around its perimeter. Despite the drone's consistent flight path, it appeared to have passed beneath something in what should have been open sky. Static whispered of something unexplained. That weekend, Jake and I escaped to the lake, our usual weekend retreat. The night was cold but not freezing. We sat on the back bench of our small motorboat, fishing lines cast, waiting for a bite. Stars blazed overhead, seeming almost touchable. The water lay like glass, perfectly smooth and still. Occasional fish nibbles and soft boat creaks broke the silence. Jake suddenly went quiet, staring behind us over the water. I followed his gaze, wondering if he'd spotted something. Then we heard it, a splash. Heavy and sudden, as if something large had hit the water right behind us. But something felt wrong. No ripple disturbed the surface, no movement. The water made a sound without actually moving. Jake whispered, "Did you hear that?" Met my silent nod. Unease settled over us. We remained motionless, anticipating something to break the water's surface. Then, from beneath the boat, a low, steady drone began. The lake was pitch black that night, with the moon hidden behind thick clouds. Jake and I were out on the water surrounded by darkness. A low, constant droning sound seemed to be coming from everywhere, and nowhere at once, just beneath our boat. I swept the area with Jake's small flashlight, scanning the water for any sign of movement, but saw nothing. It was deep, almost a vibration you could feel through your bones, constant and unchanging. I asked Jake if he heard it. He nodded, his eyes wide. We sat in silence, just listening. The droning continued for several minutes. After about 5 minutes, the sound abruptly stopped. No gradual fade, just complete silence. The sudden quiet felt even more unsettling. Without discussing why, I told Jake we needed to head back. Something felt off. As Jake started the motor, the water around us remained unnaturally still. No ripples, no splashes, nothing stirred. Normally, even the slightest boat movement would create some disturbance, but the lake seemed frozen, like it was holding its breath. Jake broke the silence, asking if I felt anything strange, like we were being watched. I struggled to explain the sensation. It's not exactly fear, I told him, more like something was just beneath the surface. Something that didn't want to be noticed, but also didn't want to be ignored. Midway back to shore, the boat's GPS screen flickered and went blank for a few seconds. That's when my unease really kicked in. The screen returned to normal, but the glitch added another layer of weirdness to an already strained situation. Stepping onto the dock felt like a relief. The familiar creaking of wooden planks, the moonlight reflecting on the water, everything seemed normal again. We packed up quietly, avoiding discussion of what we'd experienced. On the drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us. Nothing was there. Since that night, I haven't flown. I told the team it was an equipment malfunction that needed recalibration. But the truth is, I still don't understand what I'm seeing. Shadows that move without light. appearing where nothing exists. They're showing up more frequently now. Always in the middle of nowhere, always when it's quiet, always watching from above. They buzzed for exactly 1.8 seconds, then vanished. That night, sleep eluded me. The low drone and mysterious splash kept replaying in my mind. The night was dry and cool with the moon hanging overhead as I drove back from my cousin's kid's birthday in Flagstaff. I hadn't left until almost 11 o'clock after helping clean up and chatting with my uncle. The drive to Kingman was familiar. Just under 2 hours along I-40 through the desert with hardly any traffic. An old Raymond Chandler audiobook played softly and a Gatorade sat in the cup holder. Between Seligman and Ashfork, I passed a couple of semis, but otherwise the road remained empty. My truck's dash cam, a VFO model with front and rear views, was running as always, installed a few months back after a previous incident with someone running a red light. When I got home and parked in the driveway, something seemed off. Gathering my things from the passenger seat, I glanced at the dash cam while shutting off the truck. The screen was frozen on a single frame. Black road, starry sky, with a timestamp reading 12381, while my truck's clock showed 1240. This discrepancy bothered me since the camera typically syncs its time with GPS. I tapped the screen, then unplugged and replugged the device. It rebooted normally and started recording again with no visible damage. Inside, I transferred the SD card to my laptop to investigate. The files save in 3-minute segments, and I found the last complete clip ending at 12:38, followed by a partial file. This segment was unusual, only 2 seconds long instead of the standard 3 minutes. Opening the file revealed a typical view: dark highway, center lines, desert brush, stars overhead, no other headlights. But the last frame was bizarre. Suddenly, everything went black. Not just the road or the dash cam cutting out, but the sky itself. The stars simply blinked out in that single frame. I meticulously reviewed it, using various video tools to confirm what I'd seen. The desert road stretched out endlessly, and my truck's cameras had captured every detail. Crystal clear skies, dozens of stars, visible, and then nothing. I haven't been back to that part of the lake since, and I'm not sure I want to. The moment keeps replaying in my mind as if the lake was still waiting just outside. Every frame captured my attention until they suddenly stopped. Silence followed, with just NAS displayed on the final frame. The next file picked up at 12:41, as if 2 minutes had mysteriously vanished. The highway remained unchanged. Stars perfectly positioned, no other vehicles in sight. Yet something felt off. The GPS log validated my unease. During those missing minutes, I'd apparently traveled merely 0.1 miles, about 500 feet, with 0 recorded speed. It was like the system had momentarily lost track of me, then inexplicably placed me slightly ahead with no record of movement. Everything else appeared completely normal, with no visible glitches or missing footage. Rewatching the clips repeatedly, I searched for anything unusual. That's when I spotted it. A strange shimmer in the front camera's upper right corner around 12:35. Small, thumb-sized, it wobbled like an insect crawling across a dirty windshield. But this wasn't on the lens. It was in the sky. Stars behind it blurred as it passed, semi-transparent and peculiar. The rear camera revealed another oddity. At 12:37, the single frame showed a faint halo-shaped glow at the top center. Not bright, just a subtle smudge that didn't correspond to any vehicle lights. Then it disappeared. I kept silent for days. What could I possibly explain? Eventually, I shared the footage with my neighbor Danny, who had an interesting past, working, well, that's a different story. Our hiking trip began around 10 o'clock in the morning, a day out with Jason, Liz, Mark, and myself. We'd chosen a barely visible BLN land trail Jason knew, marked on his GPS. Near Newberry Springs, we parked off a dirt road and set out into the Mojave landscape. Sun-baked rocks and dry washes stretched through low hills, offering no shade. Our gear was minimal. Water, jerky, a few Cliff Bars each. Mark carried an old Nikon camera, and Liz brought her small drone. Escaping the city felt good. By noon, heat engulfed us. No wind disturbed the almost complete silence, broken only by our boots crunching and occasional fly buzzing. A rusted truck shell from the 60s, half buried in sand, caught our attention. Liz photographed it while Jason joked it looked like it had fallen from the sky. Reaching the ridge around 5 or 5:30, the sun dropped low. We rested, shared our remaining food, and watched the hills darken. Around 6 o'clock, I checked my phone. No service, but the GPS still worked. I'd marked our truck's location. I showed the footage to my friend at AOT. We were heading back thinking we had enough daylight when the light appeared. At first, it seemed like a star, but something was off. Too low, too bright, and completely silent. Just hovering about 100 feet up, a pale white orb with no discernible shape. We all stared, trying to make sense of it. Then it started moving, slow, smooth, almost gliding without effort. It drifted over the ridge and stopped again. No sound, not even the faint hum of a drone or helicopter. Liz tried to film it, but her phone was dead. I checked mine. Black screen. Jason's phone was out too, and Mark's camera wouldn't turn on. We watched as the light moved again, this time faster, then suddenly vanished. Not behind a cloud, just gone. During the drive, nothing seemed unusual. No strange sounds, no lights, no radio static or dropouts. My audiobook played continuously. When I tried uploading the dashcam clip to a CarTech forum, the file wouldn't load properly. Compressing it turned the last frame into corrupted green static. A screen recording attempt showed a solid black frame, as if something had been cut. The original played fine on my laptop, though. I saved it on multiple drives and occasionally review it frame by frame. The result is always the same. Stars blink out then return, and I was just driving. The next thing I remember, we were walking downhill. Jason led with Liz and Mark behind. Something felt strange. The darkness seemed deeper than it should have been, like we'd missed sunset entirely. My phone flickered to life. 8:12 p.m. battery at 47%. The GPS showed we'd veered half a mile off course without realizing it. I asked if anyone remembered the last hour. Nobody could agree on what happened. Did we start walking right away? I asked. Mark thought we had. Liz wasn't sure. We couldn't recall packing up or seeing the sunset. After a brief argument, we decided to keep moving. The truck wasn't far, and we wanted to leave. We arrived just after 9. The air felt heavy and charged like before a thunderstorm, but without clouds. The truck's dashboard clock was blinking. Jason's battery had died, apparently. We met up at a diner in Barstow 2 days after the hike to compare notes, and something felt off. Everyone was tired, not exactly sick, but somehow drained. My friend at AOT watched the footage carefully and only asked, "Did you feel anything when it happened?" No, I hadn't. Our group had a strange trip filled with odd occurrences. We each experienced something unusual. The dome light in our car still worked, but the vehicle itself was acting strange. We jump-started it using Mark's jumper pack and left quickly. Later, I reviewed my phone's GPS history and found something perplexing. There was a gap between 608 and 755 where the trail line simply stopped, then resumed further down the ridge, heading back toward the road. When I checked the health data steps, elevation, everything, it was as if we hadn't moved at all during that time. No movement, no heart rate changes, nothing. Jason mentioned hearing a high-pitched hum at night. Liz's smartwatch had stopped syncing with her phone. Mark started getting nosebleeds, which was unusual for him. I kept waking up precisely at 2:17 a.m. every night for a week. Liz claimed she'd filmed something before her phone died, but the video was gone. Just a corrupted file labeled DCIM 1123 that wouldn't open. Mark's camera had one photo, just a white blur which he didn't remember taking. Eventually things returned to normal. Phones worked, cameras worked. We stopped discussing it, not because we forgot, but because we couldn't explain what happened. None of us have returned to the Mojave since. I was driving west on Highway 95 about 30 miles south of Tonopah, just past midnight. I'd left Ellie after a late dinner with my cousin, planning to stop in Bay for the night. The road was quiet, no other cars for miles with only dashboard lights and high beams illuminating the cracked black top. I knew this route well from years of running deliveries, sometimes sleeping in my truck. That stretch near the test range always felt eerie, even on ordinary nights. The desert's emptiness is hard to describe. You can drive for hours without seeing a gas station. Sipping warm water and half listening to a fuzzy AM station, I noticed 3 lights in the sky, almost straight ahead about 30 to gap. White points of light brighter than stars caught my attention. At first I thought they were aircraft flying in formation. Military activity wasn't unusual in this area, so I didn't think much of it initially, but something felt different. They moved slowly, maintaining a perfect triangle with equal spacing. No blinking, no banking, no engine noise. I turned off the radio and cracked the window, listening for any sound. Nothing but wind and tires on pavement. Their movement was unnaturally steady. Unlike commercial planes that drift or wobble, the lights held their exact position for at least 5 minutes. I watched them periodically, noticing they stayed roughly parallel to the road, but not precisely following it. Slowing down for a better look, I eventually pulled onto the shoulder and killed the engine. Silence enveloped me. Stepping out of the truck, I observed the lights seeming slightly lower. Without warning, they split up. Each light darted in a different direction, one left, one up, one straight back, with such rapid movement that I could barely track them. No curves, just instant displacement. Then they vanished. Standing there, I tried to make sense of what I'd seen. Maybe test aircraft or drones, but I'd never witnessed anything move like that, especially without a sound. When I turned back toward the truck, they had returned. Same three lights, same triangle formation, exactly where they'd been before. Their reappearance unsettled me more than their initial scattering. I hadn't seen them return. They were just suddenly back, as if they'd never left. I got in the truck and drove, not speeding, but wanting to create distance. Checking mirrors and glancing up, I watched the lights track me. They remained stationary, never closing in, never fading. Then they blinked off. Not gradual movement, just an instant shutdown, like someone flipped a switch. 10 minutes later, my dash clock reset. It flickered out and came back showing 4:11 a.m., which didn't match my watch or phone. The odometer had reset too, as if I just started driving. I'm Aaron Clow, 62 years old now. My life has been mostly spent up near Anderson, Alaska, working radar maintenance for the Air Force at Clear Station. I was stationed there on and off from 1995 to 2017, with my last 3 years as civilian support. People always ask why I lock my truck every time I park, even in my own driveway, or why I won't go outside after dark unless absolutely necessary. It's not paranoia. I don't think something's going to leap out of the woods and grab me. I just don't feel right out there anymore. Not since that last week at Clare. It was October 2017 when I gave my notice. My wife had already retired and we wanted to move closer to Fairbanks to spend more time with the grandkids. I had 2 weeks left, mostly doing equipment checks and closing out service logs. The station sits in the middle of nowhere. The radar station sat isolated on the vast tundra, a lone facility surrounded by endless white landscape. Winter days were short and brutally cold, with sunrise coming late and darkness falling early. Our 3-person crew worked rotating shifts, handling maintenance and diagnostic monitoring. I worked the evening shift from 2 to 10 p.m. alongside Marquez and Dwyer, a new transfer from Offutt. Strange occurrences began on a Tuesday evening while Marquez and I were checking battery arrays in the power control room. Around 7:30, the entire system flickered. Not just lights, but every screen and panel momentarily dimmed, like during a brownout. Then everything returned to normal, as if nothing unusual had happened. When I arrived at the motel around 1:30, the desk clerk noted my pale appearance. I brushed it off and tried to make sense of the earlier incident. Sleep came fitfully, and even then felt unreal. The next morning I ran diagnostics on the truck. Logs showed no power interruption, and backup systems hadn't been triggered. I reported the incident to operations, who confirmed everything was normal. I chalked it up to a software glitch and moved on. But then it happened again. A brief flicker, barely a second long, caused a radar diagnostic panel to freeze. Marquez witnessed it too. We exchanged a knowing look and continued working silently in our environment. You don't raise alarms without solid evidence. We meticulously logged the events, recording timestamps and noting the lack of system alerts. On Wednesday night, while conducting a routine check near the east dish panel, something caught my eye in the snow. The light dusting revealed unusual tracks, not from any familiar animal. They were strange, long and narrow, shaped like 2 curved commas side by side. The depressions were shallow, forming a tight, almost deliberate pattern that didn't match anything I recognized from the area. I drove up one last time after dark, knowing this was my final shift. The sky looked the same as always. Stars scattered like familiar pinpoints of light. Something felt different, though. An unsettling emptiness hung in the air, a silence I'd experienced twice before during previous visits. No wind, no equipment sounds, just absolute quiet. Inside the station, Dyer was in the diagnostic room monitoring screens. He nodded when I arrived. As I glanced at the live feeds beyond the fencing, a faint light caught my attention. It wasn't steady, more like a slow, rhythmic pulse against the snow. White and dull, it blinked twice, then paused. When I leaned closer, the light stopped. I asked Dwyer how long it had been happening. "A few minutes," he said. I suspected it might be a reflection, but something felt off. We watched for another 10 minutes, but nothing else appeared. "Stu, I personally checked the systems. Everything looked normal. No alerts, no surges, clean logs. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not from the monitors, but from outside. I kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see someone standing there. Earlier that week, strange events had already unsettled me. On Thursday, 2 exterior cameras went dark around 6:42 p.m., almost simultaneously. One faced the northeast field, the other mounted on an unused tower. Bizarrely, the feed continued, just black, as if the cameras were functioning but seeing nothing. Marquez and I attempted remote resets. When that failed, we sent Dwyer to investigate. He returned after 10 minutes, looking uneasy. Both cameras were fine, he said. No frost, no damage, no obstructions. He kept repeating how clean the lenses were. That night, sleep eluded me. My wife asked what was wrong, and I claimed stress about wrapping things up. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the real reason. Marquez never showed up that night. He texted just before 6:30 saying he wasn't coming. Earlier, I'd noticed a perfectly spaced zigzag line curving around the structure's corner, out of my view. For reasons I can't explain, I didn't follow them. I completed the inspection and returned inside without mentioning it. Most weekends, I went fishing on Lake Winfield late into the night. The water was quiet, with stars overhead and only my boat lantern and occasional firefly flickers breaking the darkness. Benny, my border collie mix, was curled up at my feet, usually calm unless a fish splashed nearby. Around midnight, something strange caught my eye while I was really in my line. A cluster of pale lights hovered just above the lake's surface, maybe 20 or 30 feet from the boat. These weren't like any boat lights or lanterns I'd seen before. They were soft, diffuse, and weirdly, they didn't reflect on the water. Normally, lights near water would create a reflection, but these seemed to vanish into the lake as if the surface swallowed them whole. The lights remained perfectly still, even though a steady breeze was barely rippling the water. Then he stirred, lifting his head and growling softly, which was unusual for him since he's typically relaxed. Half-jokingly, I called out, "Hey, you folks lost or something?" No response came. The color was a pale blue-white, eerily reminiscent of old glow sticks or massive bioluminescent bugs, but too large and steady to be either. I considered paddling closer to investigate, but something felt fundamentally wrong. The light seemed to be watching, yet simultaneously trying to remain undetected. I pulled out my phone to record what was happening, but the battery was dead. The next morning, I called my supervisor and told him I wouldn't be coming back for my final day. I officially retired the following week. I've never spoken to Marquez or Dwyer since. I heard Dwyer didn't stay long and transferred out by spring. And that strange light, I never found out what it was. Now, I live in a quiet place near North Pole, close to my grandkids. I keep things simple. At night, I never go out unless absolutely necessary. And when I do, I always look up first. It's just a habit now. I won't return to the lake, not even during the day. Some things are better left unknown. The cameras never came back online after that night. They were eventually replaced, but no one ever discovered what caused their failure. And me, I'm content not knowing what might still be out there. The early morning was cold and still, with a handful of stars barely visible above the rooftops. Our street at the edge of town was silent, where streetlights faded into darkness and houses grew sparse. I was walking Baxter, my dog, who seemed more restless than usual. As we moved down the quiet street, only the crunch of gravel under my boots and Baxter's nails clicking against the pavement broke the silence. All the houses were dark, curtains drawn tight. Baxter pulled me towards a small cluster of trees at the end of the cul-de-sac, his behavior more urgent than normal. Suddenly I noticed something unusual in the sky. 3 bright lights hung suspended, forming a perfect triangle. They weren't like typical lights. No harsh glare, just a soft internal glow that seemed almost alive. These lights were different, strange and unnatural. For about 15 minutes, the lights remained completely motionless, defying explanation. They didn't drift or waver, just hung there with an eerie stillness. Then they began to fade slowly, like someone turning down a dimmer switch. One moment they were present, pale and peculiar, and the next, complete darkness enveloped us. Baxter relaxed after the lights disappeared, but I felt a chill despite the mild air. On our way back, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the lights to reappear. Nothing did. The night returned to normal, with typical sounds. The next day, I asked local fishermen about what I'd seen. No one reported anything unusual. I checked my phone's battery history, hoping for an explanation, but everything looked normal. I should have had plenty of charge left. Since that night, I've avoided that spot. Baxter and I still go out during the day, but something about that experience doesn't sit right. It was quiet, like a secret just beyond understanding. Not a boat, not fishing lights, but something else entirely. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it. But Baxter's early attention tells me something real happened that night. Baxter and I stood frozen on the quiet street, the pre-dawn darkness enveloping us. 3 perfectly positioned lights hung motionless in the sky, unnaturally still. My dog was completely rigid beside me, ears pressed flat, trembling not from cold, but from something else. He was scared but didn't try to run. The air felt heavy with unexplained tension. I scanned the empty street, no cars, no people, just a faint rustle of leaves and a barely there breeze. Baxter's eyes remained fixed on the sky, wide and unblinking. I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Reflection? A new drone? A radio tower? But squinting into the blackness revealed nothing behind these suspended lights. Slowly, they began to fade, dissolving into the night, as if someone had gently turned down a dimmer switch. Everything returned to normal, except Baxter seemed different. He'd never been like this before, especially not near the water's edge after dark. The street felt changed after the lights vanished. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was tense, like the world was holding its breath. Baxter looked up at me confused, as if he couldn't comprehend what had just happened. I unclenched my fingers on the leash and gave him a gentle squeeze. I haven't really told anyone about it. People say you should call the cops or news about weird lights, but this was different. Quiet, stranger. I'm still trying to figure out what it was, but I don't have answers. Just a dog that wouldn't move, and 3 lights in a perfect triangle hanging silently above a neighborhood not yet ready to wake. Just another routine flight, I thought later. A short night hop from Salt Lake City to Winnemucca in my trusty Cessna 182. A route I've flown countless times. The air was smooth that night, visibility excellent, even with the moon still low. Around 10:15 p.m., I was cruising at 9,500 feet. The night flight was smooth and routine. Miles from the Nevada line, something caught my eye, a faint glow off to the right that seemed out of place. It wasn't like ground lights from a ranch or vehicle. These were 3 dim white lights, vertically arranged about 10 or 15 miles out, slowly rising in a perfectly straight line. I checked my charts and radar. Nothing registered in that airspace. No towers, no airfields, no controlled zones. The lights didn't look like stars. They were too low and too steady. As I banked to get a better view, their spacing remained unchanged. I radioed Salt Lake Center. This is November 785 Mike Romeo. I'm seeing 3 vertically stacked lights ascending slowly. Their response was immediate and puzzling. Negative. You're the only radar. An unsettling sensation crept in. These weren't typical navigation lights or strobes, just 3 solid white dots. Then a 4th light appeared below them, fading in without any sudden flash. I radioed again, asking about tower lights or weather balloons. Salt Lake was definitive. No scheduled launches, no weather balloons in the region. The lights now hovered around 5,000 feet above me. When I banked slightly right to maintain visual contact, something extraordinary happened. The entire vertical column shifted horizontally westward, sliding smoothly like something on glass. No rotation, no change in spacing, just a perfect lateral drift. I reported to Salt Lake, visual contact with 4 unidentified lights moving laterally. No strobes, no sound, no visible aircraft body. Their response was the same, only my aircraft was showing on radar. They even asked if I wanted to declare an emergency. For about a minute, the lights held their new position. Then, without warning, they began rising again, but this time much faster. It wasn't a gradual acceleration, but an abrupt jump in speed, like shifting into a completely different gear. A night flight turned from routine to bizarre in an instant. I was flying a quiet route when objects shot straight up, vanishing into the cloudless sky within seconds. The lights didn't fade or flicker, they disappeared completely, leaving only empty darkness. I stared at that spot for a long time, and the center remained silent, seemingly waiting for my response. I offered none. When I landed just after 11:30, the hangar was dark and windless, with no one around. I secured the plane, drove straight to the motel, and didn't touch my gear. The next morning revealed peculiar details. My solar Casio watch was 10 minutes behind, something it never does. My backup headset mic was mysteriously tucked under the seat, partially unplugged. The knee board I always clipped to my leg during flight now sat on the passenger floor. These weren't impossible occurrences, but they were definitely out of place. I distinctly remember checking my time before seeing those lights, clipping the board to my knee, and coiling my headset cord as usual. Something had shifted. I've only shared this with one trusted pilot who didn't mock me or offer explanations. He simply listened, nodded, and mentioned seeing similar strange lights in that area multiple times. Since then, I haven't flown that route at night again. Our family camping trip in late August near Black Rock Desert was meant to be an escape. Just north of Reno, we sought a more remote experience than typical campgrounds. Heather and I brought our kids, Ellie and Josh, finding a perfect spot near a dry lake bed, close enough to the playa to stargaze without light interference. We were truly isolated. No cell service, no other campers. The nearest paved road, 40 minutes away. Our campsite nestled in a sandy dip, surrounded by sagebrush and anchored with rocks. A 6-person dome tent, 2 folding tables, and a pop-up shade completed our setup. The first nights were idyllic, vast skies, peaceful evenings occasionally punctuated by distant coyote calls. We cooked on the camp stove, roasted marshmallows, played cards, a classic family camping experience. The daytime heat was dry and bearable, with nights cooling quickly. That particular evening, dinner was done and a wind not fierce but strong enough to make the tent walls flex had settled in. We tightened the guidelines before bed, listening to a strange sound rushing over the lake bed, a low, constant hum that seemed to rise from the terrain's flat surface. Night had settled over our campsite. We were all tucked into the tent, the lantern off, and starlight filtering through the mesh overhead. I remember checking my watch before falling asleep, 10:17, a detail that would later feel oddly important. Suddenly, I was awake. Not with a jolt, but smoothly, as if barely asleep. No grogginess, no stiffness. Heather and the kids remained sound asleep, everything inside the tent exactly as we left it, yet something felt wrong. When I sat up, I noticed the tent's main zipper was fully closed, pull tabs tucked outside, requiring reaching through the mesh sleeve to open it. This wasn't how we'd left it. We always zipped up from the inside before sleeping. I considered the wind might be responsible, but it had completely stopped. No sound, no movement, just dead stillness. My watch read 2:46 a.m. Something didn't feel right. I had a strange sense it was earlier, maybe around 12:30 or 1. I turned on the lantern, creating a soft glow. Heather stirred and asked what was wrong. I told her I wasn't sure, just that something felt weird. She sat up and checked her watch. 2:46 a.m.? Exactly. Not 2:44, not 2:48. Exactly. We checked Ellie's and Josh's watches on the gear bag between them. Each showed the same time, despite being purchased separately. The precision was unsettling. Outside, the moonlight was low and orange, casting an odd flat glow across the campsite. Something was wrong with the shadows. Our camp stove, the surrounding brush, my own hand. None of them cast shadows. It was unnatural. Heather joined me, careful not to wake the kids. She noticed it too. The absolute silence was eerie. No wind, no insects, no distant coyotes, just stillness. Then we saw it. A faint, hazy light hovering about 20 feet above the lake bed. Roughly the size of a car hood, pale and steady with no visible source. We stood frozen, not by force, but by an instinctive understanding. Like sensing a predator in the darkness, our bodies knew something was happening before our minds could process it. We didn't speak. My weekend getaway near an old missile silo started out like any other camping trip. I'd driven from Lincoln, Nebraska, seeking some quiet time away from work and city noise. The spot I found was just a few miles from a decommissioned missile site, nothing but concrete bunkers, rusted fences, and an unsettling silence hanging in the air. I parked my RV in a clearing, set up the satellite dish, and settled in for what I thought would be a peaceful weekend of reading and maybe a short hike. The evening was clear with a gentle breeze and a slight chill. Around 10 p.m. I checked my watch before turning in for the night. Everything seemed normal. Just before 3 a.m., a deep, low hum began to vibrate through the entire camper. It wasn't particularly loud, but it felt almost physical, like the ground itself was resonating. I sat up trying to identify the source. Was it distant machinery? A truck on the gravel road? But there was nothing. No engine sounds, no headlights, just that persistent hum. At exactly 3 a.m., strange things started happening. My phone screen flickered, resetting to 12 a.m. for a brief moment before returning to the correct time. The camper's lights dimmed momentarily, and the radio crackled with static before going silent and then coming back on. Every electronic device seemed to glitch just for a couple of seconds. When morning came, the campsite looked untouched. Our watches had all stopped at 2:46 despite the sun being well up. We tried tapping them, resetting, changing batteries. Nothing worked. Heather didn't want to discuss it, and we kept it from the kids. We packed up early and left that afternoon instead of staying another night. The wind rushed back as if someone had hit play on a paused scene. Dust swirled around our legs and the brush rustled. The spell broke. We retreated into the tent, zipping it closed. My watch still read 246. Looking up through the mesh, the stars seemed normal again. By morning, everything looked unchanged. The drive back was quiet. I still have my watch in a drawer somewhere and it has never worked again. Night after night, something strange was happening near the abandoned silo. The ground would vibrate with a low, almost living hum that started just before 3 a.m. The desert near Marfa, Texas was silent and still, with flat, dry ground stretching between old silos and scattered trees. I'd parked my truck off a 2-track road, setting up camp in an area that seemed unremarkable at first. But something was off. It started with a blank file on my laptop, mysteriously time-stamped at 3:01 a.m. The days appeared normal, yet an unsettling sensation persisted, as if something watched from the surrounding landscape. Strange metallic winds carried hints of ozone and burnt wire. Each morning, I'd wake up noticing odd electronic glitches. The nearby silo, out of commission since the 1980s, stood silent with no nearby radio towers, power plants, or factories to explain these occurrences. When I asked around town, no one else reported similar experiences. By the 4th night, curiosity overcame my unease. I was determined to stay awake and record audio on my phone. As 3 a.m. approached, the pattern began. A slow vibration started, more like a frequency you could feel than a sound. Around the silo's dark silhouette, a faint pulsing orange glow appeared, strange given the thick grey clouds blocking the moon. Precisely at 3 a.m., the hum reached its peak, and then abruptly stopped. My electronics went haywire, the phone shut off and rebooted. The radio crackled into silence. Even the small LED lights on my RV's control panel flickered. A moment of dead quiet followed. Then, something unexpected. Beneath the vibration, I heard a faint mechanical clicking. Steady and rhythmic, it didn't resemble any natural sound. When the clouds momentarily parted, the glow vanished. The aftermath was equally strange. My phone's battery had dropped nearly 20%. The radio developed a persistent weak buzz, and those mysterious blank text documents kept appearing, time-stamped at 3:01 a.m. night after night. The pattern repeated. Each time, I was left more confused and unsettled, unable to explain the phenomenon happening in this remote Texas landscape. The desert stretched out, silent and dark. I was alone, half a mile from anything, exactly how I liked it. Solo camping was my thing, and I'd done this plenty of times before. My small tent with its mesh roof let me watch the stars. And I always packed water, some food, and a satellite phone for emergencies. This particular night was typical, dry and windy. After sunset, the wind died down, and I spent time stargazing. The Milky Way was crystal clear, with a few meteors streaking across the sky. I remember how incredibly quiet everything was. No insects, no coyotes, just absolute silence. I fell asleep around 11 o'clock without my watch and with my phone off to save battery. When I woke up later, the darkness was intense, the kind that feels heavy and oppressive. At first, nothing seemed wrong, but then I realized the stillness was unnatural. The desert is never this silent. Usually, you hear something. An owl, a distant dog, your own breathing, but not this time. A shadow near the silo's edge caught my eye through the window. It vanished when I blinked. Though tempted to leave, I remained intrigued. What could explain these phenomena? My research into military sites and electromagnetic fields offered no satisfactory answers. The 5th night brought more intense experiences. I left the camper door unlocked and stepped outside just before 3 a.m. A cloudless, starless sky surrounded me. The hum returned, louder and more powerful. Air vibrated, creating a slight pressure in my ears. An orange glow pulsed softly around the silo. At exactly 3 a.m., everything stopped. My watch and phone went silent for 10 seconds. The radio died completely. No static, no sound. Control panel lights extinguished. Then, just as suddenly, everything flickered back to life and the glow disappeared. I waited outside another half hour, but nothing more occurred. The next morning, my electronics seemed perfectly normal. No strange files, no drained batteries, no radio interference. I packed up and left before darkness fell. Driving away, I watched the silo fade into the distance, pondering whether the events were tied to that specific location or simply an unexplained natural phenomenon. No one I've spoken with has experienced anything similar, and I never found a satisfactory explanation. Even now, late at night, a faint hum sometimes echoes in my mind. Not loud, but just enough to make me pause and wonder, was it real or merely a trick of imagination? I was out in the desert, spending the night camping, seeking solitude under the vast, empty sky. As darkness fell, I found myself staring upward. The sky was completely still. No clouds, no planes, no satellites, just unmoving stars. The longer I looked, the more unsettling the stillness became. Something felt off. Unnatural. I retreated to my tent, zipping it up, but sleep was impossible. With a flashlight in hand, I lay awake, listening to the profound silence and watching the mesh ceiling. Near dawn, a faint humming caught my attention, low and deep, like a distant generator. I sat up, holding my breath. The sound grew slightly louder, then gradually faded, not passing by, but seemingly diminishing in intensity until it disappeared completely. When sunrise came, I emerged to investigate. Complete silence surrounded me, like someone had muffled the entire world. Curious, I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent. What I saw stopped me cold. A perfect 20 feet circle surrounding my tent. The ground inside was darker than the surrounding area. Scrub and brush were completely gone, replaced by blackened bare earth. Strangely, there was no heat, no burned smell. When I touched the ground, it was cold and hard, as if something had methodically erased everything. I stood up and scanned the area. No footprints, no tracks, nothing disturbed except this precise circle. My truck sat in the distance, untouched. The ring's edge was razor-sharp, like someone had used a giant compass. One side was normal desert terrain, rocks, thorny brush, pale dirt. The other side was just this smooth, dark patch. None of it made sense. A fire would have left traces, smoke, heat, a smell. But there was nothing. Just dry, cold silence and this inexplicable circle in the middle of nowhere. Without hesitation, I packed up quickly, skipping breakfast and coffee. I hiked back to my truck, constantly glancing over my shoulder, though I couldn't explain why. At my truck, I checked the tires and sat for a moment, scanning the barren landscape. No vehicles, no trails, just the familiar desert terrain of scrub and rocks. I drove directly to Alpine and checked into a cheap motel, spending 2 nights trying to rationalize what I'd experienced. Later that week, I examined my camping gear. Everything appeared normal. No damage, no scorch marks, but my compass was slightly off. I checked my compass against my phone and another compass, which both showed the same reading. In contrast, my camping compass was unstable, wavering, and unable to find a steady direction. Reporting the issue seemed pointless. Who would take me seriously? 3 weeks later, I returned to the site during daylight hours. The ground was dry and cracked, typical of the desert landscape, with a few sparse green shoots breaking through the parched earth. No evidence remained of that strange night, where the fire had previously raged. The burned circle stood starkly different from its surroundings. The land appeared completely sterile, as if something had methodically erased its natural state. No new vegetation grew within the scorched area, leaving behind an unnatural emptiness. The landscape felt hollow, defined more by what was missing than what was present. I apologize, but the text you've provided appears to be an incomplete or fragmented sentence. It does not provide enough context for a meaningful rewrite. Could you please share the full text or passage that you would like me to rewrite?